What's up everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today is July 4th, 2024, meaning that tonight the Calgary Stampede will be swinging open its doors for sneak a peek. And for this 10-day long event, there's a lot of stuff to do on the grounds like concerts, live entertainment, food, shopping, and of course, the Midway games. But one of the biggest parts of the Stampede is definitely the rides, so today we'll be checking out all of the rides in alphabetical order, talk about each one so you can know how many tickets each ride costs, how good each ride is, so you can plan out your day at the Stampede, know what rides you should go on. So, let's get started. So what's up everyone, like I mentioned in the intro, today we'll be checking out the Midway rides, and of course we'll be going through it in alphabetical order, and for each ride I'll be telling you how many tickets each ride costs, also be telling you my personal experience on different rides, like if it's a good one, if it's a bad one, and giving you an overall rating, and showing you the overall ride experience of each rides. So of course, let's get right into the list and check out Alpine Bobs. So first ride here, the Alpine Bobs, is a really cool one, and definitely one of my favorites on the Midway. The ride takes 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 3, and requires a minimum height of 48 inches. And for the ride experience on this, you spin around going forward, and while you're spinning, the seats can actually swing outwards, so with the force, you kind of swing around a bit. Overall, it's a really fun experience. For my experience, this ride always has a very short line. It's very fast for them to load on people and unload people from the ride, and it has a very high capacity. And overall, the ride experience on this is really awesome. Definitely a ride that I would suggest. And if I'd give it a rating out of 10, this would definitely get a solid 8. So great ride and cool to see it back on the Midway. So next up here, we got Bonsai, which is the one ride at the Stampede that I have not yet been on. This ride here, of course, takes 5 tickets. It has a thrill level of 4, which is the highest. And it has a height requirement of 55 inches minimum or 77 inches max. So for the ride experience on this ride, you get seated in one of the 2 gondolas, which swings all the way around as a full 360, after, of course, get some power from going back and forth a few times. Now, this ride, of course, I can't say too much about my personal experience as I've never been on it, but from the looks of it, it's definitely a ride I want to try out. It is one of the more extreme rides at the Midway, but if you're into that, it's definitely a great ride to check out. Overall, a really cool looking ride. And now moving on to the next ride on the list, we've got Cliffhanger, which this ride is awesome. So Cliffhanger here, of course, takes 5 tickets as a thrill level of 2, which is on the lower side, and is a minimum height requirement of 46 inches. Now, this ride is definitely more of a family-friendly ride, but thrill seekers, don't let that scare you away because this ride is awesome. For the ride experience on this, you get to lay down in this hang glider looking thing, and then when the ride starts up, it starts spinning around, and the whole part of the ride lifts up to a 45-degree angle. And honestly, it feels like you're flying on this ride. It's so much fun. Now, this ride is definitely one I'd recommend trying for basically any age because it's really fun and not too intense of a ride. And if I were to give this a rating, I'd have to give it a good 7 out of 10. It's a solid ride. And you can also get some good views on this ride, which is also awesome. And now moving on to a ride that I kind of love and hate, we've of course got the Crazy Mouse. So Crazy Mouse here requires 6 tickets. It has a thrill level of 3 for some reason. I feel like it should deserve more of a 2 because it's not too intense, but that's what it says here. And of course, you need a minimum height of 42 to 47 inches to ride with an adult, or 48 inches to ride alone. So the Wild Mouse here for the ride experience, it's a really cool roller coaster. You go up a hill, you wind down all these turns, and then you go over a few drops, and at some point in the ride, the cart also starts spinning, which is awesome. And if you have the right amount of weight in the car, you can go spinning really fast. It's really awesome. And I'll get into my personal experience. As you know, I said I love and hate this ride. There's a few reasons why I hate it. It's just because of how much downtime this ride has. There's been a couple times where I've waited in line for it and then just to hear that they're shutting it down because of some sort of issue, or I've walked past it and it's closed because they're having some other issue. Very faulty ride. It's a very fun experience, but if you're planning to wait hours in line for this, I wouldn't recommend it. But if it's a very short line and there's a good chance you'll get on it, I'd definitely recommend trying it out. And now moving on, we got one of the least extreme rides on the Midway. This one, of course, is the double-decker carousel. The double-decker carousel here, of course, takes 5 tickets. It has a thrill level of 1, so it's really for all ages, and has a minimum height requirement of 42 inches. For ride experience on this, I don't think I have to explain it to many people because I think everyone's been on a carousel in their life. Basically, just sit down on one of the mini creatures and it kind of bounces up and down. The cool thing about this ride, unlike a normal carousel, is it has the 2 levels, which is really cool. And for my personal experience on this, it's really fun. It's just like any other carousel, but being on that second level is really cool. And this ride is usually always a walk-on, so it's easy to get on. Overall, awesome ride. And moving on, we've got a ride that isn't really a ride, it's more of an attraction. But this ride right here, of course, is the Euro Slide. So the Euro Slide, of course, takes 5 tickets, has a thrill level of 2, which it deserves definitely more of a 1, but still cool, and has a minimum height of 54 inches if you want to go alone, but any height can go with an adult. So for ride experience on this, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just a big slide you get to go down. And overall, my personal experience on it, I always love going down this. Never has a long line, and yeah, it's just really fun. And you get a good view of the Midway, which is also cool too. And next up, we've of course got the Giant Wheel. So the Giant Wheel here takes 6 tickets to get on it, has a thrill level of 1, it's really simple ride, and has a minimum height requirement of 54 inches if you want to ride alone, but anyone of any height can ride with an adult. And for the ride experience on this, it's just pretty much like any other Ferris wheel. You get in your own gondola, and then you get to go around the loop a few times and get some cool views of the Midway. Especially at night, it looks awesome. For my personal experience on this, I don't usually go on. I usually go on the even bigger wheel, which we'll talk about next. But this is a good ride, especially at night, to get some good views of the carnival. In the daytime, you can also get some good views, but usually it does have a longer line. It's usually not really worth the wait, but definitely at night, it's really cool to go on. And now moving on, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about the even bigger Ferris wheel now, which I don't even know the name of it, but it's really cool, so let's get into it. So the massive Ferris wheel here requires 20 tickets to get on, which is quite a bit. It has a thrill level of just 1, and of course has a minimum height requirement of 54 inches, or to ride with an adult, you can be under that height. And for ride experience on this, it's definitely a big upgrade from the normal Ferris wheel. It's almost double the height, I believe, and inside the gondolas, it's actually air conditioned, which is really nice, and you get really good views on this ride. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this takes 20 tickets, so it is a pretty big ticket eater. If you have a wristband, it's definitely something I'd recommend going on. But of course, if you have tickets, just remember that 20 tickets is equal to around $20, so it is a bit expensive to get on this. But for my personal experience, it's really good. You get some good views, and it's a nice air-conditioned break from the hot sun in Calgary. So overall, another great ride. Alright, now for the next ride here, I'm just going to say this is the worst ride in the Midway. We've, of course, got the Haunted Mansion. So the Haunted Mansion here requires 5 tickets, has a thrill level of 2 for some reason. This one also should have a thrill level of 1, and has a minimum height requirement of 42 inches to go alone, or anyone under that can go with an adult. And for ride experience on this, it's pretty lame. You get to go around this haunted house, but the big problem is every time I've been on this in the past so long that I can remember, almost everything in it just does not work. So you're basically just traveling around a hot black room for 3 minutes. So unless you have a ride wristband, I would not recommend wasting your tickets on this. It's just not worth it. And North American Midway, if you're watching this, please fix the Haunted Mansion. It could be so good if everything worked on it, but unfortunately, most things just don't. And moving on to the next ride, we've got Himalaya, which is another awesome one. So Himalaya here requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 2, and requires a minimum height of 52 inches to ride alone, or 48 inches to 51 inches to ride with an adult. So for a ride experience on this, it's really fun. You get to go around in a circle. And the coolest part about this ride is it's one of the rides with the DJ on the Midway, which is cool. So it's always blasting music, and as the guy that sometimes comes on the loudspeaker. It's overall really awesome. Even if you're just standing on the side, it's a really energetic ride. And from my experience, it's a really fun one. It's another one that usually doesn't have too long of a line because it's usually quick unloading and offloading. So overall, it's an awesome ride, and I'd love to see it back on the Midway this year. And moving on, the next ride we have here is another one of my favorites. We've got Mach III. So Mach III requires 8 tickets, has a very high thrill level of 4, and requires a minimum height of 55 inches and a maximum height of 75 inches. So for ride experience on this, it is so awesome. There's these 2 arms that are attached to this one thing, and they spin around with you at the end, and the seats are able to rotate and just kind of whips you around. Overall, it's so awesome. Now, for my personal experience, I would definitely recommend riding this ride first thing in the morning or late at night, because this thing has a really slow load-in process and very low capacity, so it gets a very long line of sometimes up to an hour during the busy parts of the day. So if you want to get on this, get on it when it's not busy, and overall, it's really fun. You won't regret it. It's a great ride. And now moving on to the next ride, we've got another awesome one. This ride, of course, is Mega Drop. So Mega Drop here requires 6 tickets. It's a very high intensity ride with a thrill level of 4 and has a minimum height requirement of 54 inches or a maximum height requirement of 82 inches. So Mega Drop here is kind of like any other drop tower. It lifts you up to the top. You get to sit there for a few seconds and enjoy the view. And then when you're least expecting it, it drops you over 100 feet. It's overall a really awesome ride. Now, my personal experience on this, it might have to be my favorite, or at least one of my favorite rides on the Midway. I love that drop feeling. It's so awesome. And if you want to ride this, it's another one that either early in the morning or late at night's best time to ride it. It can get quite a long line in the day, but overall, it's definitely a really good ride to ride. And moving on, we've got a ride which is going to be coming in really handy in the next few weeks. This ride, of course, is Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls here requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 3, and requires a minimum height of 48 inches, or you can ride with an adult if you're between 42 and 47 inches. So for ride experience on this, do know that you will get wet. It's basically just like a log flume style ride. You get to go up the one hill and go down, get wet, and then there's another hill you get to go down. Overall, really awesome. It does get a really long line in the day, especially this Stampede with it being in the 30s every day and constantly sunny. It's going to be a popular ride. At night, the line does die down a lot, which is good. It's always fun to ride this at night, even though you do get wet. But overall, great ride, and definitely one I'm going to have to go on a few times. And moving on, we've got another one of my favorites. The next ride here is Orbiter. So Orbiter here requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 3, and requires a minimum height of 48 inches. This ride is like Scrambler, but way more intense. The ride spins around and lifts up, and then each of the arms, the cars on it, also get to spin around, and they also tilt up to about a 45-degree angle. Overall, it's really intense, but also really fun. Definitely one of my favorite rides on the Midway. For me, it's always a ride that I have to get on at the Midway. It's just so much fun. Definitely one I recommend. Great ride, and cool to see it back for another year. And next up, I have some really great news. The Outlaw roller coaster is officially back at the Stampede for its first time since 2019. Outlaw here is a really awesome coaster that's been a while since we've seen it. The ride here, of course, takes 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 3, and a minimum height requirement of 51 inches to ride alone, or 42 to 50 inches to ride with an adult. So for ride experience on this ride, it's nothing too crazy. You get to go up the hill, down a few drops, around a few turns, and overall, it's a pretty solid coaster. I'm a really big coaster guy, so honestly, I'm really excited to see Outlaw here again at the Stampede, and overall, it's definitely a ride I'd recommend checking out. It's really cool, and yeah, cool to see it back. And the next ride, of course, on the list here is Pharaohs Fury. So Pharaohs Fury requires 5 tickets, has a thrill level of 3, and a minimum height requirement of 48 inches. Overall, for the ride experience on Pharaohs Fury, I definitely say it's a better version of a rockin' boat. I feel like it's always way more intense. It feels like it always goes way higher, and it feels like you're gonna fall out. It's just so fun, but also so scary at the same time. From my experience, this ride is always a really good one. It doesn't usually have the longest lines on the Midway, which is nice, so it's definitely a good ride to go on if it's getting busy. So overall, great ride, and another cool one to see back. And now moving on, we've got another one of my favorites on the Midway. This ride right here, of course, is Polar Express. So Polar Express here requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 3, and a minimum height requirement of 50 inches. Now this ride is essentially the same theme as Himalaya, except it goes backwards. It has kind of the same layout of the ride. It has the same sort of look, and of course also has the DJ music with the guy blasting music. And of course, he can also come on the loudspeaker sometimes, which is also awesome. From my experience, this ride can get some pretty long lines sometimes throughout the day. It's definitely a ride that I'd recommend riding late at night. It's just so much better because of the look and everything of it. And of course, it does have a shorter line later at night. But yeah, overall, it's another awesome ride. And next up, we've got another one of my favorite rides. This one right here is Remix. So Remix here requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 3, and a minimum height requirement of 52 inches and a maximum height of 74 inches. Remix here is similar to another ride I talked about known as Orbiter, except Remix is way faster and way more intense, and your legs get to hang down, And walking off of this, because of how your legs are hanging down, just because of how much faster this is, your legs just end up feeling like jello, which is such a weird feeling, and one of the reasons why I just love this ride so much. It just feels so awesome. In my personal experience, this ride is always a must ride for me. It's just so much fun, and it's really cool to see it back. It's definitely a really intense one, but still a really cool one to check out. And up next, we have another ride which I'm not the biggest fan of, but lots of people love it. This ride, of course, is the Ring of Fire. So the Ring of Fire requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 3, and a minimum height requirement of 48 inches. The ride experience on this is nothing too crazy. It's just kind of like the never-ending loop of a roller coaster. You kind of go back and forth until you eventually get enough speed to go around the loop, and then you get to go around it a few times. Now, this ride I'm not the biggest fan of because it just feels like it goes on forever. Again, this ride, and that's just 5 minutes of just going back and forth, which just honestly isn't that much fun. I'd rather go on the rocking boat over this ride. So yeah, definitely a ride I'm not the biggest fan of, but maybe you'll be, maybe it's worth trying. And the next ride we have here is the Carnival's bumper car style ride. This ride, of course, is Scooter. So Scooter here, I believe, is one of their rides that they have 2 of on the Midway. So if you want to find this, there's usually 2 different locations for it. But basically, this ride requires 5 tickets, has a thrill level of 1, and requires a minimum height of 48 inches to ride alone or 42 to 47 inches to ride with an adult. Now, for ride experience on this, it's pretty much like any other bumper car style rides. You get to go around and bump into a bunch of other people. Overall, it's really fun, and you do get quite a bit of time on the ride. From my experience, this is another ride that usually has shorter waits, especially since there's 2 of it on the Midway. So definitely a good ride to check out. Always a fun one. Classic on the Midway. Great to see it back again. And now moving on, we've once again got another one of my personal favorites at the Stampede. This ride, of course, is Star Dancer. So Star Dancer requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 4, and requires a minimum height of 54 inches. And for ride experience on this, it's a pendulum style ride, so you get to go swinging back and forth until eventually goes all the way around, which is awesome. And of course, the seats on it also do spin around in this like claw theme, which is really cool. Overall, it's a really fun ride and really forceful too. This right here is another one to either do early in the morning or later at night, as it gets a pretty long line during the day that can be up to an hour long. But overall, it's a really good ride and definitely one of my favorites on the Midway. It's probably in my top 3. It's just so much fun and definitely one that I would recommend going on. It's just so good. And next up on the list, we've got a ride which always confuses me how the ride operator works this. But basically, we've got the Starship 3000. Now, most of you probably know what this is. It's a classic ride on the Midway. Basically, you get into this spaceship-looking thing. You lean up against the ride, and it spins around, and the forces push you against the wall, and the seats kind of like fly up against the wall, and you can do a bunch of cool stuff. It's kind of like zero gravity a bit. And there's always that one ride operator in the middle just constantly spinning around all day, which I don't understand how they can handle that job. So in my personal experience on this ride, it never has too long of a line. It has really good capacity, but during the middle of the day, this ride does heat up a lot, so it's really hot going on to it. So it's definitely one I'd recommend either doing earlier in the morning or later at night when it's cooler. But even during the day, it's still not too bad and just an awesome ride to do. And I can't believe I forgot to mention, but this ride requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 2, and requires a minimum height of 42 inches. Good thing I remember to say that at the end, but let's move on to the next ride. And next up here, we got another cool ride. This ride here is the Sween Tower. So the Sween Tower here is a more relaxing way to see the Midway if you don't want to go on the mega drop. The ride, of course, requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 3, and a minimum height requirement of 48 inches. For the ride experience on this, it's pretty simple. You get lifted up a tower while the ride spins, and it's kind of like you're on a swing. You get to swing around the tower. It's really fun. You get to feel the breeze in your face and get a good view of the carnival. Overall, it's awesome. In my experience, this ride's another awesome one. It's another ride that can get quite busy during the day, so it's another cool one to do either early in the morning or later at night. Definitely at night to get that good view of the carnival. It's a great one to go on. Overall, an awesome ride. And now moving on, the next ride we have here is another one that there's 2 of them on the Midway. This ride, of course, is the TiltedWhirl. So the TiltedWhirl here requires 5 tickets, has a thrill level of 2, and a minimum height height requirement of 46 inches to ride alone, or if you're under 45 inches, you can ride with an adult. Now this ride here for the ride experience, it's a bit hard to describe, but you basically spin around in a circle on this platform, and in your little ride vehicle, it can also spin around just with the forces of the ride. Overall, it's really cool, and from the footage here, you can kind of see what I'm trying to explain. From my experience on this, it's really fun. It usually has a very short wait, and it's just really fun to get on this ride. Definitely one I'd recommend. Definitely worth the 5 tickets you spend on it. And of course, it's cool to see this one once again at the Stampede. And now moving on to the second last ride on the Midway, we've got the WaveSweener. So the WaveSweener here requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 2 and a minimum height requirement of 48 inches. For the ride experience on this, it's another awesome one. There's this massive swing theme with all these swings hanging down from it. And when the ride starts, it lifts you up a tiny bit and then swings you around. It's really cool and really fun just feeling the wind in your face on this one. From my experience, it's a ride that never usually has too long of a wait with how many people can fit on this ride at once. Even if it looks like it has a long wait, you're only going to be waiting around 10 to 20 minutes for this ride on a busy day. This ride is definitely one I'd recommend going on. Not too intense, really fun, just a great ride to spend your time on at the Midway. And now, of course, moving on to the final ride on the Midway for the 2024 Calgary Stampede. We've got one which was here last year, but never really opened. This ride, of course, is XDrive. So XDrive here requires 6 tickets, has a thrill level of 4 and a minimum height requirement of 55 inches and a maximum height requirement of 77 inches. For ride experience on this, it's really interesting. You get loaded onto these seats that are connected to this arm, and the arm spins around and the seats are able to flip around. Overall, it's a really intense and crazy ride. You never exactly know where you are. And for my personal experience on this, I've never actually been able to ride this. It's really weird. Last year, they brought to the Stampede, they're promoting how it was the new ride for the year and everything, but it never really opened. I think it was shortly opened on Sneak a Peek because I remember seeing on the news person was on it. But then I went the next day, it was closed, and during the rest of Stampede, every night I was there, it was just closed. They never got back open, and even for K-Days in Edmonton, they didn't even end up setting up the ride. There's just something wrong with it. But fortunately, this year, they are bringing it back, and hopefully this time, it will be open for Stampede, and I can't wait to try this ride because it's brand new, and overall, looks like a really awesome ride, and yeah, I can't wait to try this out. And with all said, that is it for today's video, everyone. Hopefully you did enjoy. I know it was a bit of a long video, but there's a lot of rides at the Stampede, and hopefully this helped you decide what rides you should go on during your day at the Stampede. Especially if you're buying tickets, it's good to know what rides you should or shouldn't go on. And of course, if you have wristbands, it's always good to try everything, but some rides can have long waits, so sometimes you can't get on everything. But yeah, overall, looks like it's going to be an awesome day for Stampede. I can't wait to go in just a couple days for my first time this year. And also, I'm really excited to see the concerts and everything, which go check out that video if you're curious about some of the headliners this year at the Coke stage. But anyways, that's it for today. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.